Bitcoin begins. This is episode 3 of this series with the Texas Blockchain Council. I'm Ryan Harper with Michael Llewellyn. And what we've been talking about, we talked about the history of money, then we talked about what is Bitcoin, and now we're talking about Bitcoin beginning. So stick around. Thanks for being here.
Welcome back. It's time to talk about where Bitcoin began and where it went after the white paper dropped.
And I guess Bitcoin's a superhero?
To many people it is. Oh yeah. And just as controversial as a vigilante running around at night.
Yeah, what's funny, I know it's too early to go to tangents, but like there's such a huge language, because again, I've talked about being in this space for like 2 months. It's learning a new language.
Yes.
And like and I didn't even know what a Bitcoin maximalist was until like 2 weeks ago.
Well, you have to be taught. You have to learn that first there's a problem, and some people maybe they're aware they're thinking there's something wrong here, but they actually have to learn what's wrong, and then they have to realize how Bitcoin potentially addresses it.
Yeah, like there's one, because I have a group chat, and there's some language that like IM or IMI, whereas it basically stands for not going to make it.
Okay.
And I was like, whatever it was, but I'm like, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know what they're texting. I don't know.
There's a very large dictionary for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We could do a whole series on that.
Yep. We'll dive into some of it.
Okay.
here.
Good. The lingo. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll sprinkle it in.
So we'll start. We're basically picking up right where the white paper left off.
2008.
Yep. So 2008. Just the white paper. That was all we're talking about. We're in the middle of a financial crisis. And
Lehman Brothers, all that.
Yep. And so around January 2009, the white paper has been around for a few months. Satoshi Nakamoto releases the code and launches the network. So the code is now public for anyone to read.
So that when they release that white paper, is this like how many people are reading this? How many people is it going to? Is there like a newsletter? Is it that cypherpunks organization? Are they still around?
So it's
how
kind
does
of
it get disseminated?
It's like a specific mailing list for basically kind of cypherpunk. I think it was a different mailing list than the original, but basically it was, hey, it's kind of like you were just on a forum with a bunch of friends of similar interests. It's like being a Facebook group of maybe a few hundred, maybe a thousand people that were all interested in the same thing. In this case, they were interested in cryptography and cypherpunk tech. And he was like, hey guys, I built something that looks cool. What do you think?
Because to me, that's almost just as interesting. Yes, Bitcoin is this global impact thing, but the fact that it came from either a guy or a group of guys to a few hundred people on a newsletter, to a few more hundred people, to thousands of people, to now it's where it is now.
Yep.
It's like that wildfire effect.
Very humble beginnings. And then he released the code and basically said, here's some code, take a look. Anyone can fork it or use it, but no one did in the beginning. But what he did do is on January 3rd, he started up the network. It was just him running the first node, and he mined the first block, known as the Genesis block, which basically means here's the block, here are some transactions.
It sounds so like Star Trek-y,
It
Genesis
was
block.
Just bootstrapped it, got it ready. I mean, it was more humble beginnings than Facebook. It was just like Satoshi alone with his network. There might have been a few other people running nodes at the time, but for the most part, it was almost like a hobbyist project. It wasn't. They weren't immediately saying this is going to be the payment network of the future. It was just, let's see if it works.
Yeah.
That was kind of the attitude. And the first block contained this nice little message that he embedded in there, where he took a headline of the Times from London. Saying, hey, 3rd January of 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So basically, he put a little Easter egg in there saying, in case you wondered why I did this, because we're currently going through a financial crisis.
That's crazy. I no clue. No, I didn't know that.
Yep.
But I don't know a lot, so that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, and it's something that, it's...
that's in the Genesis block.
Genesis block. Yep, first block. Put a little Easter egg that just said that line along with the transaction. And the first person that received a Bitcoin transaction was Hal Finney, who was one of the earlier innovators on the kind of digital cash front. So he was the first person that received some Bitcoin from Satoshi, because the first Bitcoin that was created was mined by Satoshi, so he got the first Bitcoin reward. Since, basically we're issuing a certain amount of Bitcoin every block, and so he got the first amounts of Bitcoin. He started sending it to a few people to experiment.
Right.
And it took off from there. And people were swapping Bitcoin around like it was... I mean, like, it was nothing. It was just a way to experiment and see how it worked.
So they were doing it almost out of fun and experimentation versus anything.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't have any specific value at the time.
Can you imagine being one of these early adopters where it's like, hey, here's 1 billion Bitcoin. Well, there's not 1 billion, but here's 1 million Bitcoin just for fun.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, cool. Well, I'll keep it. And then 15 years later, I'll be a gajillionaire.
Yep. Hopefully you held on to it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, Hal Finney, Wei Dao, Nick Szabo, all these guys that used to be working on their own forms of digital money way, 5 to 10 years ago are now playing with the Bitcoin. So a lot of these guys were, they were tight. It was a small group of people that were even working on this sort of thing.
Now, these guys, Hal Finney, I don't know their name, Wei Dai?
Wei Dai, yeah.
Wei Dai, Nick Szabo.
Yeah.
Are they held in the highest regard in the Bitcoin community? Is it almost like, oh, it's the Dalai Lama?
I would say not as much as Satoshi, but definitely up there of these were the OGs, man. They were there back in the day, like Nick Szabo and Hal Finney for sure. Because unfortunately, Hal Finney passed away from a terminal disease. So people definitely hold him in high regard. And his work was fundamental to how Bitcoin eventually worked. So yeah, these were kind of the, if George Washington is the founder of America, these were the other founding fathers.
So if there's a Mount Rushmore for Bitcoin, you would have a blank slate because nobody knows who Satoshi is, and then these 3 guys beside it?
Potentially. There's other people that might be on the list, but they're definitely in the running.
Got it.
And yeah, from there, several years passed. I mean, we had 2 years where it was essentially just this experiment. Really, I would say outside of this small group of people, no one was really talking about this up until around 2010 is when it started to go and kind of filter into maybe not the public consciousness, but beyond that original group. You started having other people on the internet play with it and experiment with it. And then you had this guy named Laszlo who decided to buy pizza with it. So he went back to pizza as one of the first Bitcoin transactions for a commercial payment that had occurred. And there was no price for Bitcoin really at this time. So he's like, about 10,000 Bitcoin will probably do it for 2 Papa John's pizzas.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of rumor and there's a lot of speculation. But was it just did he pay Papa John's for that, or did he pay somebody else and somebody else bought the Papa John's and delivered it?
I think he just paid the person running the Papa John's at that time. So probably a franchise.
Okay.
But yeah, it was essentially just, I don't think it was a Papa John's thing. They were not saying, let's support this Bitcoin thing. It was just one guy to another, what do you give me for this pizza?
But the point of it is not the actual it's just the fact that there was a transaction.
Yeah, because there had been transactions, but this was the first transaction where I'm actually paying for something of value with Bitcoin, as opposed to just playing around with it.
Right.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was Papa John's though.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I like Papa John's like the rest, but
10,000 Bitcoin. I don't know.
Where was this? New York.
Actually, I'm not sure where it was. I just know that that. So this is probably old, but as of July 5th, 2020, when I made the slide, that's $93 million for that pizza. If you had held on to it.
Yeah. I wonder what that is now.
It's probably 200 million or more. It's expensive pizza.
Gold leaf in that pizza. Come on now.
I hope he enjoyed it. He said he actually spoke about it. He said he does not regret it. He's like, you got to buy it for something.
Yeah, I met a guy here at the TBC. His claim to fame is he said he spent 786 Bitcoin on an iPad. And he's just like, why?
Yep. All of us. That's the early Bitcoin days. But now, around this time, Bitcoin started to get a little bit more traction. And it was actually this point where WikiLeaks was deciding to use Bitcoin to accept donations. And they got shut off by credit card providers because they were obviously very controversial because they were releasing government secrets. And this was around the time that Nakamoto disappeared. And a lot of people speculate on why. And I think the prevailing opinion is that he saw Bitcoin starting to gain more traction and get more public attention, and he did not want to be in a position to be held responsible for what Bitcoin was doing, or specifically for people to come after him for this thing that he created.
Well, it seems because this is episode 3.
Yeah.
Up until now, everything's been kind of altruistic, and hey, we're moving forward. It's all flowers and rainbows,
and very low key, just experimenting.
Yeah, and because again, we don't want to be 1984, that kind of thing, and whether you're pro against WikiLeaks, that's not the point. But there is an element of seediness to WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Because you are going against the government or against
There's confrontation.
Confrontation is the right word. So, like, regardless, so if they are now accepting payments in Bitcoin, I could see where, oh, Bitcoin's about the Silk Road and all that thing, because whether it is or whether it's not, it's easy to manipulate the media to push that narrative.
Yeah, well, and just in the terms of a government, like a federal, like, if the FBI says we got to go after a payment provider that's like supporting WikiLeaks, they don't have, especially back then, maybe they do now, they don't have a concept of a blockchain or a thing that isn't controlled by one person. They're just like, oh, this Bitcoin thing, who's running that? Oh, this guy, let's go get him. Even though he was, still trying to stay anonymous, I think he did not want to be in the spotlight at the same time as Bitcoin. And there's other beliefs that he wanted it to kind of continue without this, mythical founder figure that would have a lot of influence. That's another opinion. So basically, he handed control over to Gavin Anderson, that developer, for the code base, and essentially stepped back and was never really seen or heard from again.
Can you imagine, though, when they're WikiLeaks taking donations in Bitcoin, and they're like, well, how much did we get? Well, we got about 3 pizzas worth.
Yeah.
We got 50 pizzas worth or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, and around this time, we were also starting to just see markets appear for like a few cents. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the big thing here is that, like, you have Gavin became the lead developer for the Bitcoin Foundation, which was kind of this entity created to shepherd Bitcoin, but it was really decentralized over time. Development for Bitcoin is still very based on like a large group of developers deciding kind of together, how are we going to make these changes? And even then, when you make changes to the code, everyone that runs that code has to decide to adopt it. So you have a very decentralized version of development. It used to be kind of Satoshi would push a change and everyone would accept it. But from this point onward, it was very much opened up to the world to participate, but also to question.
Well, and by doing that, it I don't want to say completely negates, but it probably limits anybody's ability to do anything that goes against the community or goes against the chain, or I don't know what you would call it.
Well, yeah, it's essentially, it's such an open area. There's no one you just say, I'm just going to trust his opinion. Bitcoiners are very suspicious by nature of any like one authority.
Just go on Twitter.
Yeah, so they're going to question it. They're going to try to understand it, but it makes them very resilient. It makes it hard to make decisions, and that's something you might critique Bitcoin for today. But when they make decisions, they definitely go through a very rigorous process to reach it.
Right.
So yeah, at this point, Satoshi's out of the picture, and it's almost an organic, natural growth.
And Gavin Anderson, is he around today?
He's around. I don't think he's directly involved as much as he used to be, but it's definitely it was one area where like he's kind of consciously decided, I'm not going to try to like take up the mantle of Satoshi and be this central figure. I'm going to make this decentralized, because I think partially he didn't want that responsibility on him, but he also thinks, and a lot of other people think, wouldn't be in the spirit of Bitcoin. So from here on out, we have markets. So in 2010, we start to finally see markets where you could buy Bitcoin with dollars with some sort of a known price based on like what supply and demand was. So like the first Bitcoin exchange starts trading, and Bitcoin is worth about like a third of a penny. That was the first kind of like recognized price for Bitcoin in an open market.
And then how were they making these exchanges?
Usually they were just kind of like, they were small websites, or they were people trading kind of like over the counter, which is kind of like just cash trade.
Was it similar to, call back to episode 1, where you had the merchant in China and the same merchant in Spain, and using that kind of thing?
Kind of, except we're branching over the internet. So basically,
Right.
like, someone somewhere has dollars, whether it's through PayPal or through a bank account or through cash,
Right.
and then someone else wants Bitcoin, and there's a trade. So there's kind of like a market where people could meet up and make that trade.
Right.
Whether it's through like kind of a order book, like a stock exchange, or just like literally like a Facebook post saying, hey, I got crypto and I'm selling it for this price. What do you who's interested? There's kind of that dynamic was growing. And then in February 2011, you had the first really marketplace for using Bitcoin payments, and it was not the most scrupulous one.
Right.
And which was a Silk Road, which ironically was created by Ross Ulbricht, who is a UT Dallas alum, where I've been teaching this course.
He created it?
Yep.
Is he in jail?
He is in jail.
Okay.
That's a whole other topic, but yeah.
Yeah.
He is now in jail, but he was the first to really create a marketplace where Bitcoin was the primary mode of payment. That was the only way you could do it because, it was obviously an off-the-books kind of illegal exchange, so you're not going to use a normal payment provider. Bitcoin's really your only option.
Well, what's fascinating is like 2011, it's now 2021. People still have, when they hear crypto, when they hear Bitcoin, they still have memories of Silk Road.
Silk Road, in many cases, was the first time anyone ever heard about Bitcoin.
Right. So even today, it's crypto.com. They've got that. They just spent $700 million for the old Staples Center, the naming rights.
Yep.
So obviously it's mainstream, but even though it's mainstream, people still have this, it's seedy. It's seedy.
And there's definitely a narrative that I think has been pushed about that, but there's also like some genuine beginnings where, the parts of society that couldn't engage in commerce openly were definitely the first ones to adopt it. In some cases, it was for, I would say, even though there was a lot of illegal activity online that I wouldn't agree with the Silk Road, like there were definitely cases where, hey, I can't buy this medication in the States, but it's available in India. You didn't have any other options besides something like the Silk Road to get that sort of medication to you. So, and I wouldn't defend the Silk Road, but I would say that there was a need that it was filling beyond just nefarious needs.
Well, in a half joking, half serious way, and Lee, don't get mad at me for bringing this up, but do you know why VCR went VCR and not the Betamax?
Oh, I remember this story, but I can't remember the end.
Porn.
Ah, that's right.
Because the porn industry went the VCR route. So I think if we really want to see Bitcoin explode, is if that industry starts taking Bitcoin.
Oh, they do. Pornhub's all about it.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, there it is. It's solidified.
That happened years ago, yeah. We're
Episode 3, that's it.
Yep.
Bitcoin's here to stay because it's on Pornhub.
Yep, pretty much. But I mean, in the beginning, this was like the area where like the demand for Bitcoin, because there was a marketplace now, there was a standard. Like this was a standard marketplace for Bitcoin. That definition of money that we went back to in the beginning of the unit of account, standard of measurement, medium of exchange, this was a market that fit all the boxes.
Was this the dark web?
Yeah. And there's more to break down there. But
I know that's a whole other series that we don't need to go into.
But yeah, it was a market. It was a web. It was on the Tor network, and it was a form of the internet where it was harder to track people, and people could engage in this sort of commerce without feeling like they were going to get tracked down. Even though it's still possible, it was just a lot harder. Mm-hmm. So it is the version of the internet where you're meeting in a bar where no one's like saying their name or anything like that. It's kind of that. But it was an open marketplace, and it was one where you did have a better level of trust than the actual version of a drug market, like meeting someone on the street or meeting someone through a reference and it's kind of shady. You had reviews. You had like Amazon-style reviews on, hey, this guy's got good stuff and he actually delivers it on time and I've never had a problem with him. And you had, still an illegal marketplace, but it's a marketplace that was much more efficient and in some ways safer than the alternatives. And with, clearly a payment provider like Bitcoin, where the payments were entirely secure.
It's fascinating to me that, as bad as the product they may have been pushing, the ingenuity of humanity, is amazing.
Yeah, and so Ulbricht basically built this kind of as a side project, thinking, I think this is a cool way to just, and he believed politically that people should be allowed to do this. He was super libertarian, but it was also like a business model where he started making millions of dollars eventually because it was a massive market. And so eventually, over time, like there's a lot more traction, and you actually had governments. And 2013 is around the first time governments started to take notice of cryptocurrency and especially Bitcoin. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network, actually issued guidance for how do you treat this, usually around like anti-money laundering and KYC and things like that, very early on. But this is when governments are suddenly thinking, something here, something we got to at least be aware of and potentially issuing guidance on. Mm-hmm. So now it's in kind of the larger consciousness, and in October 2013, this is when it really hits the mainstream. The FBI shuts down the Silk Road and arrests Ross Ulbricht. And this is when people are talking all about this guy, Ross, or Dread Pirate Roberts is what he called himself online, that created this drug marketplace online. And it was a great story. Sounded very dramatic, but this idea of like, how is it doing this? Well, the seedy internet money called Bitcoin is how you do it. And that's where, this is when I was in the, I had broken into it around 2012 and got really involved early part of 2013. So I was going to Bitcoin meetups and talking to people, and a lot of them, some of them had used the Silk Road or they were like talking about it. And then suddenly it hit the mainstream media for the first time, and the meetups went from like a couple of guys, maybe 6, to like dozens of people showing up saying, what is this? What's going on? Apparently it's big enough that the price is shooting up. And this was around the same time that Bitcoin's price peaked at $1,200. That was a massive run up from, I think, maybe 100 or 200 earlier that year to like 1,200, and people were freaking out.
Well, I mean, yeah, because if we look at the slide, 2010, 1/3 of a cent.
Yep.
3 years later, $1,200.
Oh boy.
And we're both looking at that going, man,
only about $1,200.
if only I bought in at $1,200.
Oh,
you know?
I've been through a lot of bull cycles, and I always wish I had bought more.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. But yeah, I mean, and then around 2014, this was a really unique part of it, and I've done some ethics reports on this. You had Mt. Gox, which was the largest Bitcoin exchange at the time, collapse. And we got a really big lesson on ultimately not your keys, not your crypto, which means that essentially people were using Mt. Gox as an exchange to not only buy and sell Bitcoin, but also to hold Bitcoin. They were like, why would I move it out of Mt. Gox? I'll just keep it there. I have an account, a username, a password. They weren't using a private key to control it directly. They just used Mt. Gox. Mm-hmm. But Mt. Gox suffered several hacks over the course of 2013. Hundreds of Bitcoins were lost. Thousands of Bitcoins were lost. And they tried to cover it up. They tried to in fact, there was even one point where the CEO tried trading crypto on the market to make up for his losses and lost more during a bull run. And then eventually the whole thing came crashing down. They started suspending withdrawals. They started cutting people off. And then anyone who had an account with them, they lost everything.
How much?
Millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin at that time.
So not only did they lose the currency, but then they also lost the fact that, hey, you bought it at 3 cents and it went up to $1,200 or...
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just...
It was actually at the peak of that price when Mt. Gox really hit. Because really, Mt. Gox caused the collapse of the price because so many people were counting on Mt. Gox. And in many ways, maybe the supply was the expected supply was greater because Mt. Gox was allowing trading to occur on Bitcoins that didn't actually exist. There's some speculation around that. But really, at the end of the day, they were responsible for nearly 80% of the trading activity at that time. And suddenly, the biggest exchange for Bitcoin goes down with all the Bitcoin with it. People freaked out and started selling Bitcoin. People didn't know if it was Mt. Gox. Some people didn't even realize the difference between the two. Mm-hmm. So it absolutely killed the market, and the price collapsed massively to, I don't have it on here, but it collapsed to like $200 a few months later.
But, I mean, so it collapsed because it was hacked.
Because Mt. Gox was hacked, yes.
Right, Mt. Gox was hacked. And what they were trying, but isn't that what Coinbase and all these exchanges kind of do right now?
They do. They've learned a lot of lessons from Mt. Gox. And so you know what Mt. Gox stands for? This is a funny story.
Uh-oh.
Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It used to be primarily for trading Magic the Gathering trading cards. They got into Bitcoin later. But the level of security didn't improve much from there.
The magic didn't protect them?
No, it did not. And in general, it was just it was a sign of just how early we were because the industry was really not that professional. It was a group of guys that had a Magic the Gathering online exchange. They sold it to another guy, and the crypto market just took off, and they didn't really grow their security policies or their website infrastructure with it.
There's a huge, obviously there's a lesson there, but you said it, not my keys, not my crypto?
Yep, basically.
Meaning if you don't have it on cold storage, is that the right word?
You could do hot wallets as well, but basically if you don't have a private key, and you're the only one that has a private key that owns that crypto, you're trusting someone else with your crypto.
So like my Coinbase account, that's not a private key, right?
Nope. That is you trusting Coinbase to not lose it and to give you access when you want it. So basically the other risk you would run is if the government came in and said, hey, we think this guy's been committing fraud, freeze his account, they'll freeze your account, you don't have access to your crypto. Mm-hmm. So that's another scenario. Or even just Coinbase. There's a lot of scenarios there, but basically Coinbase could freeze it, and the only recourse you have is to go after them legally. And in the case of Mt. Gox, they still have a lawsuit going on. They might have just settled, I can't remember, but basically they're not getting anything back. The money was gone.
Right.
Yeah. It's a default.
And then as far as the MetaMask, is that like a cold? Is that your?
That's a hot wallet. So you have keys on your device, but
But that's my private key?
That's your private key, as long as you keep it secure. And that's another key thing. Even if you have a private key, let's say you're on your device, but your device, you also decided to install something. You find hot new singles in your area. You just have to download and install the app, and then you get to
like
meet
Tinder?
all these.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just
Hot
saying,
new
like,
singles?
I'm talking about like the average spam email you'll get.
Oh,
that
okay,
says,
okay.
Download this thing, you'll get this great thing.
Got it.
And then they get access to your computer, they look around, they're like, oh, he has a crypto wallet, and there's a key in here. And especially if you don't password protect your key. I think that you have to by default, but like let's say they also figure out your password, they get the key, they get your crypto.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you have cold storage wallets where it's entirely disconnected from the internet, where you can't even access it. And I've got, I think, later slides that get deeper into wallets. But that's another important part is like, how do you make sure you have, you keep that private key secure?
Because one of the things I hear a lot is the benefit of crypto is, hey, if you don't know my code and if you don't know both the security line or the key and then the passphrase, you're not getting it.
Yeah, and more importantly, even if you're not stolen, but if you lose that, you also can't get access back.
Right.
So in some cases, maybe like for a grandma, maybe it makes sense for them to use Coinbase over a private key because at least they have some fallbacks.
Well, like if you're like me, I don't have that much money, so whatever, a Coinbase.
Yeah.
But if I've got like $10 billion, well, maybe that needs to be like only
and I think that's,
on a cold wallet in a vault in another vault and whatever.
Yeah, and that's I think the takeaway from this, and that's like I think some crypto people will say always use a private key, never use a custodian, and that's I think a fine policy for them if that's the way they feel. But for some people, I think it's just important to know that there's a spectrum here. There's kind of the day-to-day hot wallet where I'm just carrying it around like if I get mugged, $200, not the end of the world. Versus my life savings, like there's different levels of security I'll have for both, and that's kind of way you would treat crypto. Like I use Coinbase, but I also have my offline wallets. I've also got my like wallets that I carry around with me, but there's not a whole lot of money on there.
Because that's one thing, like, and I don't want to go too far off topic, but because like in these Bitcoin world, Twitter's anti-fiat, blah 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 blah, going back throwaway to last episode talking about fiat is at least with my bank, if it gets hacked or whatever, I can go to Chase and be like, guys, that's my money.
Yeah, and you have the FDIC.
Exactly.
So you're insured up to $250,000 minimum.
Right.
So that's a lot of protection you get. Whereas with crypto, you don't depend on anyone, but you also are responsible for your protection. And you can still choose to trust other people, but you have to be aware of the risks.
Right.
So that's ultimately the takeaway from
this
Mt. Gox.
This Mt. Gox thing, it breaks my heart for all those people.
Oh, yeah.
But it blows my mind as well.
Yeah.
It was both.
It was a sign of how early. Yeah.
I can't imagine.
I saw the Bitcoin meetup groups around that time turned into just therapy sessions of like, oh man, how much you lose? Oh no, God. It was.
I can't. I mean,
oof.
Because again, I mean, how many conversations? Like, because the conversation I hear all the time is, how much Bitcoin you have? Not enough.
Yep.
It's always not enough, and it's like, well, what if you had enough, but it was enough in Mt. Gox, and then it's gone?
Yeah. There's a lot of those stories.
It's crazy.
Well, and moving on, and yeah, so despite the volatility, this is the last thing I said, Wikipedia started accepting Bitcoin donations. And I think from 2014 onwards, you really see more companies accepting Bitcoin. Some started and then stopped and others, but in general, you did see this massive traction where certain merchants would accept it. I think the one interesting area where basically there was like apps that would say, hey, we'll accept Bitcoin for you and give you dollars, for example, like, connect to Coinbase or something, like BitPay was another. And you actually had a lot of particular merchants, like, for example, gold and silver retailers, ironically. You'll say, somewhere you go online and you buy silver or gold, you might buy 10 grand worth of gold or silver if you're investing in it, and then have it shipped to your place. And the risk that someone like that runs when you're selling gold and silver online is, one, you're going to have to use a payment network that, like a credit card, that charges 3 to 4%. 3 to 4% on 10 grand is a lot. Especially when it's a low margin business where maybe you're buying that gold for, maybe, let's say silver, you're buying silver for $15 an ounce and you're selling it for 17, that 3 to 4% might really cut into your bottom line. But beginning to cut that out and get instant settlement with something like Bitcoin is a real pro. And even if you have to sell that Bitcoin, maybe you sell it for like a 0.2% fee on an exchange or something way lower than 3%, it's still a win for you. You get that instant settlement and you don't have to worry about a chargeback. So if you're shipping them gold or silver like 10 grand worth and then they go to their credit card provider and say, I never got it. Just reverse that charge. That's 10 grand. That's not like a pizza or a gym membership. That's money and that's gold or silver that they can melt down and carry away and sell somewhere else. So like that, I actually saw a lot of precious metal retailers at the time getting into Bitcoin and still accepting Bitcoin today because as a payment option, it was a win-win for them. Mm-hmm. Even though you see some gold and silver guys are like, Bitcoin, I just use gold. Sometimes they're old-fashioned, but a lot of them were actually like, as a payment option, it's great for the pains that they had as a merchant. It solved a lot, and I think it does for a lot of others too.
I would be curious to know, like WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, some of these early adopters, if they held on to that Bitcoin, or did they just cash out immediately? And if they did hold on to the Bitcoin, they're probably some of the richest companies in the world.
I would not be surprised. I bet some of them definitely sold them to like pay expenses, but I would not be surprised if some of them still held it on the books. It'd be a good question. I'm sure WikiLeaks did, knowing WikiLeaks. Wikipedia would be another story.
Right. But it was just interesting to me. It's like, hey, we're like a nonprofit and we're run by donations, but yet you have $100 billion worth of Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
That'd be a good donation, that's for sure. By the way, the Texas Blockchain Council does accept donations in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Dogecoin if you're really feeling peckish. So from here, I mean, at this point, we've created essentially a whole new industry. And Mt. Gox was kind of one of the first, but now we have this massive industry, kind of a financial service sector specifically for crypto, of exchanges and wallets, so software wallets, and different systems for actually sending and using crypto back and forth. So you could use the standard Bitcoin wallet out there, but you have to actually sync your node and do a lot of other things. But now people are offering wallets where you didn't have to sync your node, where you had better security, maybe a better user experience. It's on Android, it's on iOS, it's on Mac. This whole class of services.
Yeah, the only two names I know on this is Binance and Kraken. The only reason I know Kraken is because Lee was talking about some partnerships with Kraken potentially. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I don't know. Maybe that was the wrong word. It doesn't matter. And then Binance. And the only reason I know Binance is because I was trying to you can laugh, it's okay. I was trying to get the who's that YouTuber? Logan Paul. He was doing an NFT thing and he had that zoo coin. It was like 0.00000 whatever. I was like, well, he's real famous on YouTube. Maybe that, if anything's going to blow up, that will. And I was trying to buy some of it, but it was through the Binance network, but we're in Texas, so I couldn't do it.
Yep, and that's a recent thing. Back when these first came out, no one cared about jurisdiction. They just listed it on the internet and you're good to go. Because regulators weren't even aware of it. It's a different world now, but in the very beginning, these were just coming out. And I should say Mt. Gox was not the only exchange to be hacked. There were plenty of others. I can't name any specific ones off the top of my head, but $1 million hacks were definitely aplenty. And up until recently, it's only up until recently really that exchanges, at least a lot of the top ones, have become sophisticated enough to really be trustworthy to the extent that I think there's a 1% chance of Coinbase getting hacked today. At least my personal opinion. It's still there, but I'm not nearly as worried about it as I would have been back in 2015, 2014.
And besides, I'm not too worried because if they're going to hack Coinbase, they're going to go for the big accounts, not my baby account.
Well, it depends on how Coinbase holds the money. Do they hold it in one place or all together? That's a big thing you got to worry about.
Giving me a panic attack over here. Oh no, Michael's killing me.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, we saw exchange volume, and this is 2020. It's definitely higher now.
I'm still sick.
600 billions of volume.
I'm still sick. The Mt. Gox thing, it just.
Oof.
I'm not even affected. I didn't even know. I'm just hurting still.
Everyone hurt. Yeah, even the people that weren't in Mt. Gox. I mean, that hit the price pretty hard. Everyone had a long is this going to go on? There was definitely some some fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was definitely brought into the community. But the fact that I think a lot of people came out with healthy skepticism and an expectation that exchanges do better, I think definitely was better for the industry long term. Knowing how bad it can be definitely helps prevent it for the future. It was a good better then than now to learn how much exchanges could lose, especially considering how much they trade now.
So do you think, Mt. Gox, when it went under, or I guess, go under, but got hacked, do you think that's what the catalyst to say, you know what, let's have a ton of exchanges?
Not necessarily, but I definitely think, because other exchanges existed at the time, it was just Mt. Gox was so prolific that they had a massive amount, but I definitely think more exchanges could carry on from where Mt. Gox left off as a result because it left a big vacuum to be filled, as well as more competition in the sense that like now the security of the exchange obviously is a big impact, and I'm going to go with an exchange I feel comfortable with and offers me good services, offers me cheaper fees. The fees have gone down over time, and also different jurisdictions. You know, we have exchanges that try to target certain jurisdictions. We have some targeting the U.S. Or some targeting other parts of the world, and in general, it's just grown quite a bit. And you also still have things like AML and KYC becoming more of a factor. It used to be you literally signed up with the username and password, and maybe you hooked up some sort of a payment provider, but you basically could start buying and selling crypto right then and there. Today, in most cases, for exchanges that are regulated, they're going to require a driver's license, they're going to require some identification. There are alternatives to that that we'll talk about with DeFi and decentralized exchanges, but that's for another time.
Right.
So yeah, a new financial service, and it's a massive one. It's one that's going to be growing, I think, for quite a while.
And I alluded to earlier, like, because Crypto.com, that's an exchange.
Yeah.
And they were able to spend $700 million for the naming rights to the Staples Center for the next 20 years.
And they're not even one of the bigger exchanges. Like, they're up there, but like, they're like maybe, I don't actually know where they stand in the rankings, but like, I mean, they're just one of many now.
It's insane to me.
Yep.
I'm sure it's insane to a lot of people, but
it's going to get more insane, trust me. And speaking of insanity, mining operations, because that has gone from a bunch of guys running on standard computers. Like, you didn't need, because Satoshi Nakamoto never, at least he never explicitly said you have to like run this really big computer. His initial idea was people just run it on normal computers with like their normal hardware, and that would be enough. But because Bitcoin was built to scale with difficulty, you know, if people doubled the amount of computation, Bitcoin would double the difficulty to accommodate it and make sure the supply was steady. Eventually, you know, people were competing on getting beefier machines and bigger hardware. And eventually, I think it was around probably 2011, 2012, something like that, people started coming out with ASICs, the idea of an application-specific computer that was like, I build this computer specifically to do one thing and one thing only, and that's mine Bitcoin.
The reason I'm laughing is because anytime I'm on a just like anything, when you have friends and you know a little bit more, you're the expert until you can introduce to somebody more knowledgeable. And like I was literally on a call like maybe several hours ago with a friend of mine, and we're talking about crypto and mining and this and I bring this up because anytime I bring up ASIC, I have to Google it real quick to know the words application specific, integrated, whatever.
Circuit.
Yeah, but it's just funny that you're like, oh, just rattle it off. And I'm like, let me Google this real quick. Yeah. Sorry. And a little, side thing.
Yeah, but it was definitely an interesting area where like that completely changed the game. You know, when I remember because I started mining on normal computers, but even when I started mining, it was like computers that had like decent graphics cards, so decent amount of computational power. But like, I remember I started mining, I think around 2012 on these computers, and then like a year later, my profits had gone down by like 90% because suddenly ASICs were in the game, and if you didn't have an ASIC, you weren't making money.
And then the PO, I'm assuming that's proof of work?
Yep.
Okay.
So it turns into a race for the best hardware. And then Bitmain, which was a Chinese-based manufacturer, started making these ASICs, and people were lining up to get the newest and greatest. Other manufacturers started soon after. So this industry for people to create miners and run them was born out of this. And this is when the first early mining farms and mining manufacturers really took off. And it's grown since. Now we're at a world where people are buying, megawatts of electricity on the Texas grid to run massive farming facilities.
Well, it's funny because I was talking to Lee, president of the Blockchain Council, and because I was telling him how I have a couple friends who want to start some farms. He's like, "Oh, just let me know. I have a hookup for electric. I can get you a discounted rate at 10 megawatts." And I don't know what that means. And then I go to a friend, and he's building a 250 ASIC mining farm, and even at I think he said it was going to be like 0.8 megawatts. So I'm like, okay, if that's 0.8 and that's 250 ASICs, okay, you need 1,000 plus,
yep,
just to get that discounted rate.
Yep,
that's a lot of power. That's a lot of miners.
And it's a very competitive space because now it's about economy of scale. Like how much can you get together in bulk buy and bulk purchase both the hardware and the electricity to be competitive. So now people are competing for the best hardware and the lowest power costs, which is why Texas for low power is very attractive. But you also have an interesting area where people have kind of debated this since ASICs took off of, all this power is being concentrated more and more in these mining operators, which is not the original intent of Bitcoin. It was going to be like just average people running on average hardware.
Yeah.
So even though a lot of people see this as healthy long term, because it's very very difficult to attack something that has that much power, that if you get 51% of the mining power for Bitcoin, it would be incredibly difficult. But the ability to participate as kind of an average Joe with an average paycheck or an average computer doesn't exist anymore. There's other ways you can participate, but it's not mining.
Well, like, when do you think it? Because again, I can understand the like, oh, every household, not every household, but like the 100 people in this little community that first started, like first read that the white sheet, they all have their computer that's running something. Like, what year do you think? Okay, people are starting to build these giant farms.
I think it
Like,
started.
how early on do you think that was?
I think around 2012 is when it did start to
Like,
transition.
once it was like, okay, there's significant money. Because like if it's like the 0.003 cents, it's like, I don't necessarily want to invest in this.
I would say that's where it really started to flip, and then over time, maybe 2013, 2014, maybe 2015, that's when it really transitioned over to they were the ones making the money.
The miners.
Yeah, or really the mining facilities. Like, it really wasn't a...
Oh,
you could,
versus...
and granted, you could still buy an ASIC and put it in your home and still mine that way, but you still needed to get that special hardware. You couldn't just do it on normal hardware.
The barriers to entry to this industry is massive, because like you said, these machines are expensive, but then the electrical is expensive.
Yep, and they're loud.
And then, well, like a buddy of mine, he
hot.
Yeah. He literally is like, we all got into mining, and this is like 2 months ago, and we got him into GPU mining Ethereum. He's like, okay, this makes sense to me. So then he bought 5 ASICs, and he put them in a closet, and he had he got electrical run, and he got the ventilation in there. But you know what? The ventilation wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. So now he's like, well, I need a facility. I need to do this. So within a span of less than a week, he went from building out a room in his office to house 5 ASICs to being like, well, this isn't going to work, So, and you're talking about a guy who has means to be able to do something. Like me, if I'm like, oh, I'm gonna spend $12,000 on an ASIC miner, throw it in my garage, and then realize, oh crap, I don't have a power. Well, then what? I'm just, So, and I mean, that's more than one miner. That's, I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, and it continues. It's a massive industry, and that's really, but it's just an incredible thing. It's like a data center, but for securing a distributed network rather than just cloud computing or whatever you're doing there.
Yeah.
And then after that, this is an area we'll dig into more, but altcoins, which is just other cryptocurrencies, enter the scene, and now you have this. Hey, Bitcoin's code is open source. You can copy it, you can tweak it. So you had Litecoin, you had forks like Bitcoin Cash, you had Ethereum, and suddenly the whole world explodes into all these different varieties of Bitcoin that are kind of like slightly tweaked to do different things.
What's so funny to me is my experience in this world has been, I started trading Dogecoin because a buddy of mine's like, he made like 50K on that boom this summer, earlier this year. I'm like, okay, I'll get a Robinhood account and start playing with it, and I did not make 50K. I made it a little bit, but not anywhere close to what he did. And then it's like, okay, I'll trade some altcoins here and there, and all the while my mentors who are the most knowledgeable and most money, they're like, just do Bitcoin. Just do Bitcoin. And I'm laughing because this entire time we've done 1, 2, 3 episodes, the history of money, the what is the Bitcoin, the why is the Bitcoin begins. And it's just like, I haven't thought about the altcoins at all, even though in my personal history, it's all been altcoins up until like a couple days ago, and then just talking to you here, it's just, oh yeah, I'm not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh yeah, that exists.
Yep. And Bitcoin's enough to try to absorb on your own. But I would say altcoins were appearing even as early as Satoshi being around. There was actually a great area where Satoshi name dropped one of the earliest altcoins. It was actually called Namecoin. It was an attempt to do a decentralized DNS system. You would basically be able to use Namecoin to buy a domain, and then the Namecoin network would secure that domain. And so you could get I forgot what it was, the domain was called, but it was you could get Michael.Namecoin or whatever they use as their dot. But that whole idea was it's distributed and the DNS system can't censor us and that sort of thing. And Satoshi's like, yeah, that's a cool idea. So ironically, Satoshi is not a maximalist, even though Some maximalists would definitely say that like most altcoins are garbage, and there's definitely debate to be had for the value for some of them. That's definitely very much a discussion.
Well, that's the other thing I hear a lot of is because as much as people like to talk about blockchain and Bitcoin as as revolutionary as the internet, they also I hear a lot. Hey, just like in the dot-com boom where 95% of all that was trash and you lost all your money, 95% of all the altcoins are also trash.
Yeah.
So it's a game of not being the last one holding the bag.
Yeah, more than likely. And I think there are going to be those, there are standouts, and we'll talk about some of those standouts like that are going to do something different enough that it's valuable on their own. But I think there's definitely a case to be made that what Bitcoin is doing is going to be pretty, they're definitely still in the lead as like the money kind of crypto, and then there's other alternatives to it. Like you got, Zcash, Monero that are kind of like privacy based. You've got obviously Ethereum that's like a smart contract system. So you got these different use cases that are being explored. And then you have things like Litecoin where they just tweak Bitcoin just a little bit. But the value of those tweaks is kind of debatable. So, I mean, there's going to be different cryptocurrencies like every week practically. So, but it's thousands of cryptocurrencies, massive valuations for some of them. It's a crazy world. But it all started because Bitcoin was open source. All you had to do was take that code, copy it, start up your network, and you're good to go.
This is a little timely and may not be evergreen for a year from now, but one of the things that made me chuckle so much, and I feel bad for these people, but I really don't, but that Squid Game coin.
Yes.
Where it's like, well, the Squid Game is a popular Netflix series where everybody dies, and then it's like they did a Squid Game coin. It's like, I wonder what's going to happen. Everybody dies,
or everyone got rug pulled.
Right, but it was just like, well, no kidding. What do you think was going to happen?
I think I haven't read the details, but I do remember seeing it.
Either,
I read the site at one point, and I do remember it saying like it was going to like narrow down to one winner or something like that, kind of like Squid Game. But I think the winner ended. Somehow they made it so that it's actually we're the winners, the guys that made it. We're going to leave now.
Yeah, something like $2 million were just stolen.
Yep.
Well, stolen. I don't know if stolen is the right word, but
and they're not the first. BitConnect, Gladia Coin. There's a lot of scams in the past that have said and what's ironic is some of them will build themselves as like open source and protected, but they'll build out platforms that essentially they ultimately control in the end, and people aren't aware of that. It seems so much like Bitcoin that they trust it like Bitcoin, but in reality, there are some back doors in there that let people kind of take the money and run.
And I think that's where the education component has to come into play, because when you go to an exchange, you see Bitcoin and you see Ethereum, you see Doge, you see Shiba Inu, you see this, you see that. Oh, they're all the same. They just have different prices. Yep. So what time frame are we looking at for the altcoins? Like when did that become
as early as 2010? But
really?
Yeah, like around same time Satoshi was around with Namecoin and things like that. But then I think 2012, 2013, more of them come out, and really just ever since we've seen more and more copycats. Probably the biggest, most notable would be Ethereum around 2013, 2015. 2013 is when it gets announced. 2015 it gets launched. And we've even seen copycats now of Ethereum that are kind of copying what Ethereum did. So there's a whole family tree that's branched out from Bitcoin for all these different coins that exist. Forks of forks, essentially. When you fork, you're just saying, I'm going to take your code and then create my own thing. And that's essentially what the whole cryptocurrency industry does. Is none of them start from scratch. They use Bitcoin or they use something like Bitcoin, and then they build it from there. So yeah, fascinating industry, and definitely more versions I'm sure to come. But ultimately, where are we going? So we're kind of up to today in the sense of like this is where the industry's been heading. But by the numbers, Bitcoin's looking pretty good. This is outdated by a year, but we're still going to use it. $171 billion market cap is definitely outdated. It's like, I think we might have hit $1 trillion at one point. I can't remember. It's been a while. But 20 million unique users at least, 15,000 companies, 13,000 transactions per hour are being processed. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. Everyone knows what Bitcoin is. No one really is in the dark. Even if they don't know how it works, they know at least it's around. So it's really validated the technology, and it's challenged the very concept of money as we know it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the numbers are completely off the market at this point. It's like a year out of date.
I think that's the biggest thing right there is like when you have that much of a user base, it's not going away.
No. Doesn't matter.
Because I think a lot of people are like, well, is it gonna last? Is it gonna last? It's like,
got more users in some countries. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more growth in the future. I mean, it'll have its ups and downs.
I saw a graph the other day about not the what's the word? It's not usability, but the where people are actually using it.
Transaction rate or
Adoption rate. Adoption
rate.
It was the graph of the adoption rate of the internet, and it was the adoption rate of like Bitcoin, and it was just like line for line exact.
Yep, I would not be surprised. Same thing, just goes through its bursts, its fits and starts, and in case of Bitcoin, I haven't put this in the slides, but they have scalability solutions around the Lightning Network, because right now Bitcoin, because it's so distributed, it's limited on how many transactions it can do to match up to something like a Visa or MasterCard. So things like Lightning are trying to improve that by doing a lot of transactions off-chain, taking some of the effort out of the main network so that people can still get the security of Bitcoin, but they can transact a lot more and a lot faster. And those technologies are still being adopted, but it's usable at the point that like I have a wallet on my phone. I've paid someone in Lightning recently. It was an instant transaction, very cheap by comparison to most. So and other solutions are out there as well for making it more scalable.
Yeah, the gas fees, because like...
Well, in the case of Bitcoin, it's just transaction fees. Gas fees are an Ethereum thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well,
Bitcoin guy would be very mad to hear you say gas fees. They're like, oh, that's part of it.
I'm just using wordage that it comes on the thing. But like, because I've been dabbling in the different mining of the different type of coins, and I mine MXC. I don't even know if you've ever even heard of that.
I might not have, actually.
Yeah. Anyway, but I mine it, and it's like, oh, cool. So in theory, it's like, oh, you've mined $500 this month or whatever. I'm like, oh, cool. But if I want to send it out of that wallet, it's $75 transaction fee or gas fee,
Yep.
and then it goes to like, where do you send it? And then how can you convert that to fiat? And I'm still trying to figure it out. And then the smarter people are like, you didn't try to figure that out before you bought the miner? So why would I do that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, but
I'm a jump before you read.
I mean, it used to be that way for Bitcoin. People were like, I got a miner. How do I sell it? You know, back when exchanges were just not nearly sophisticated as they are today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that Bitcoin industry is growing to the point where, I mean, there's billions of dollars in volume traded, and I can pretty easily move large amounts of Bitcoin without any trouble. It's like, that's kind of a sign of a robust system.
That's why I tell anybody, and even on video, it's like, listen, don't listen to any financial advice I ever give. I'm not versed enough, and disclaimer, we're not financial advisors. Yeah, there we go.
Yep, but it's a good place to learn. And I mean, ultimately, what we've got here, I put in this last slide of like where we're going. And, you know, we're still in a pandemic, even though things are kind of like lightening up. And especially when I made these slides in 2010, we were in the heart of them. Yeah. So really, we saw like, you know, you already saw digital payments growing, that it just shot up through the roof. No one was using cash or in person or even being around people for a while.
Well, there was a lot of chatter in the media specifically about how all these people took their stimulus check and put it in Dogecoin or took it in GME or AMC or the meme coins or whatever, and they made hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And speaking of which, a lot of money got printed because of that. You know, not just because of those checks, but just government spending in general shot through the roof. And so people were very worried about, like, you know, and now, right now, we're going through inflation that might have been a result of what happened a year ago, or at least higher inflation than normal, potentially 5% or more. So it's getting to the point where people are more than ever recognizing the value of something like Bitcoin. To the point where central bankers are talking about it. You know, Christine Lagarde, who's the IMF director and president of the European Central Bank, is talking about, like, this technology is going to be important, and they're talking about their own version of digital currencies, creating central bank digital currencies that are issued by a central bank but use this technology to some degree. Facebook is working on Libra, so they're working on their own digital currency based on a basket of currencies, and many other countries are looking at it. China, Dubai. I think almost a third of all countries are looking at some form of digitization for their currency in the same way as that a crypto works.
So are they trying to reinvent Bitcoin, or are they trying to, like, digitize what's already existing?
I think they're trying to digitize what's already existing. Some of them might be kind of going down the Bitcoin route, but for the most part, I think they're really just looking to say, hey, how can we compete with Bitcoin by offering a similar level of technology that can service people directly with instant settlement. And then I think, but there's also those exceptions like El Salvador that are saying, hey, we're just going to use Bitcoin as it is, which is a very recent thing. So now we're seeing, you know, El Salvador, or I guess recent for this year, we're now, you know, the president's saying, like, citizens are able to use it. A lot businesses are required to accept it, which is very different than anything we've had before. It's the first time a country has said we're going to go all in on Bitcoin, and put it on the balance sheet for the whole country. So yeah, it's a very different world, and I think we're going to continue to see that accelerate over time. So really, fiat currency isn't going away, but it's got competition.
Right.
And Bitcoin, ultimately, it uses cryptography in a way that was previously limited to commodity money, like we had said before, like gold. You know, gold was trustworthy because we didn't rely on a bank, we didn't rely on a government. It was just, gold was gold, and we expected gold to be valuable because it was protected by the laws of chemistry, in the same way that Bitcoin's protected by the law of mathematics and cryptography.
But you brought up in the history lesson that even gold, how do you the provenance of that gold is, well, the king put a stamp on it. So therefore that entire bar of gold is an entire bar of gold, not lead with a gold shell.
Yeah, and actually that's a limitation of gold that Bitcoin is able to address by saying, you know, automatically our system will validate every payment that goes through. The whole network will participate in validating every payment to the point where we're always going to be in agreement. There's kind of it's required that you get that stamp of approval, not by even one person, but by the whole network, by a miner that proposes that block, and by every node that accepts that block.
So when it comes to like the pushback, you know, like any governments, why wouldn't they want Bitcoin? Is it because it's the power, the hegemony of having, I don't even know if I use that word right, but using the currency and having the power? Because as we've talked about before, the country that has the gold has the power to do whatever the hell they want to do.
I think it's going to be a mix. I think it's going to be partially, you don't want to give up the power from money creation. It's a very hard, it's a hard thing to give up because you do get a lot of benefits, but they're more short term, and long term it can have a lot of downsides. But I think also the fact that they're just going to have to learn to understand this technology. I mean, they're not used to, it took thousands of years for humans to kind of coalesce around gold and silver and precious metals as a common currency. I mean, Bitcoin's been around for 10 years, and we're having this whole show to get people to understand it, but a lot of people in government are going to have to do that as well, which we do with the Blockchain Council. It's educating policymakers on why it's important. But really, at the end of the day, I think they're going to be forced to either adopt it or at the very least acknowledge it. Because, I mean, El Salvador is just one country, as a small country, but more, I think, larger countries are going to start to see Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as something that they would rather accept than US dollars, potentially. At the very least, something that they're like, hey, we might not trust each other to print money responsibly, but we can trust Bitcoin to be responsible.
Well, going to the political side of things, like, and understanding it more, it's like, for me, like, my journey through all this is, I don't understand it. That's another motivation for me to do this show with you. But also, like, the people I trust the most do understand it, and they're all in on this. So I'm one of those guys where, yeah, I'm going to follow them off the cliff. And they're like, oh, if they jump off, would you? Like, those guys? Yeah. If they jump off, I'm jumping. Because they know something. Maybe that's stupid, blind faith. It doesn't matter.
I mean, that's how most people operate. There's only so much you can know yourself. You got to rely on others.
But what I wanted to say about the politician side about is just understanding. It's like in Texas wise, it's like, listen, as we open this, or not open, but just make it a little bit more accessible for blockchain type technology, and like, look how many companies have moved to Texas for the blockchain side, the mining side, you know, the gas burn-offs. It's just like, seems like there's so much opportunity, and it's dumbfounding to me when you see politicians not take advantage of that.
Yep. And it's similar.
Like, what are you doing?
It's similar to what happens when the internet and that technology came around. Like, you know, the first people to start saying we should use email or we should use Twitter for talking to politicians. Like 10 years ago, that was weird, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, Barack Obama, when did he get his Twitter account? Like 2014, 2012? Like, and now it's something where if the president isn't on Twitter, then that's like a violation or at the very least, it's incredibly controversial because that's how everyone listened to him.
Right.
So technology moves quickly, and politicians might move slower even than most people. But man, when they do realize the writing on the wall, I think they're going to move a lot quicker than we'd expect. And I think we're in one of those areas where, at least for who we've been talking to with the TBC, a lot of politicians are starting to recognize it. And I think a lot of people that trust their politicians, which maybe not a lot, but I think there are politicians that that work locally, especially in the state level, that do have a lot of traction, when they see their politician talking about that, or a local leader, just anyone,
Right.
saying, hey, I think this is something we should be invested in, something we should be supporting, I think that's also going to open a lot of doors.
Well, that was one of the conversations I had here. It was like, because the TBC the Texas Blockchain Council wants to stay apolitical.
Yes.
They want to be bipartisan.
We were political about crypto and nothing else.
Exactly. But when it comes to the different types of, but like there will be future endorsements based off of your belief structure of crypto.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm like, oh yeah, that does make sense,
Yep.
Whereas before it's like if let's all come together and have a conversation, and I think it's still going to be like that no matter what. But it's like, hey, if your belief structure is this and that goes against what we're trying to do, it's like, let's talk to the other guy.
Yep. And I think what we're going to see is a dynamic where
politics is new for me, people.
Yeah. Well, I think also what we're going to see is it's going to be a question of who's in power and what are their policy goals. Because ultimately, man, if you're trying to print a lot of money, you're trying to do a lot of fiscal spending, it's difficult to put Bitcoin on a balance sheet or anything that is objective versus what you can print. And I think that is where we're going to see a lot of, like, whoever's currently in power is probably not going to be the most pro-Bitcoin or pro-crypto. Like, Democrats are in power now. They're not. A lot of Democratic people out there are, I would say, more negative than positive compared to Republicans. But I would not be surprised if that shifts if we put a Republican in the White House or in government at some point. So I think, educate both sides. And I think both sides are going to support it when it's advantageous to them.
Yeah.
But if they understand it enough that they'll take advantage when they can, I mean, that's still going to be, I think, positive long term.
Yeah. I'm blown away because I've been working with TBC for about 2 months now, and I've been blown away. Like, it seems like every single day there's more and more people joining member-wise. There's more and more company-wise coming in, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Oh, yeah.
We had that happy hour here like a week and a half ago where we had 120 people here.
Yep.
Where the event, we had a happy hour the month before. You know how many people we had there?
Like 30, 40?
15.
15. Oh, yeah.
15, 20.
Yep.
So within 1 month, and again...
Exponential growth.
Right, yeah. But like at the summit, there was like 700 people at the summit.
And 3 U.S. senators.
Yeah, and then several state level representatives as well.
Yep.
So this whole movement is a movement. So if you want more information about the Texas Blockchain, I can't talk. What is it called?
The Texas Blockchain Council.
Thank you so much. I have a big tongue. The Texas Blockchain Council. Go to the texasblockchaincouncil.org. Send an email, get some more information. If you want to join, sign up, or just keep watching these videos.
Till the next one.
I don't know. Was that the last slide? Sorry, I saw in conclusion.
Yeah, it's the last slide.
Okay.
Actually, I had a few things on here, but I don't think.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
I'm long-winded, but when I'm done, I'm done.
The only thing is money we know it is changing. That changes how we measure value. That's pretty much it.
So what do you? And again, I like to ask this. What do you think is the biggest thing about this section?
Oh yeah. So I mean, I think the bold part highlights it, but I think money is changing. Like, we're changing what we consider to be money. Like, the dollar is changing, obviously, because the supply is increasing. It's becoming more digital. But then also, like, what people consider money to be changing, because obviously Bitcoin changes a lot of definition, and therefore how we measure value is changing. Because that's, I think, what Bitcoin and blockchains can do, is they can measure value, and they can measure, and they can record who has that value. So you have, essentially what you're creating is, the book, the ledger book of the world, which is ultimately, like, previously it always has to be one person or bank or group maintaining a ledger, and now we have something that can be truly global that everyone can reference, and that's really a new thing that we haven't had before, especially in a digital form. So I think that is what's really going to be transformative. I think how it transforms society, I have some ideas, but I think we're all going to find out.
Well, there's a lot of, it's interesting because, like, DeFi, decentralization, but it's like, in a lot of ways, this is unifying.
Yes, I think it's unifying, and it's going to be it's unifying in a open way. It's like, okay, people can create their own crypto, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be the best thing that wins. The best money, or the best platform, or the best smart contracts. It's a very competitive, almost unforgiving space. But I think that also is going to yield some of the best things for, like, right now we're in this area where still most people don't use this technology. It's still not used by the majority of people. But I think,
well, not just used, they don't even know what it is.
Yeah, but it's also going.
Like, go back to the cypherpunks thing. I'm like, oh, You know, like I'm just completely clueless about stuff like that.
But I think it's going through so much rapid transformation now that it's almost like I wouldn't want most people to use it quite yet, at least on a day-to-day basis, because I mean things could change between 6 months on like what crypto makes sense. Even though I think Bitcoin is a good stability, like I think Ethereum is a good place for smart contracts, even those are getting challenged a bit. And I would love to see the space really take another, you know, just take the time to really dig into like what's best for the average consumer, and then build things that they can come to and they say, wow, this feels just as good as a PayPal or a bank account, except I get these levels of control or transparency I didn't have before.
I would love like, because like I have 3 virtual assistants that I pay them with PayPal, and PayPal charges me $5-6 to pay them, and I'm sure they pay $5 or $6 to receive it. So and maybe that's not that big of a deal of a transaction cost.
Well, it adds up.
Yeah,
It's friction.
yeah.
So I mean, I think removing friction is another thing that you could say both Bitcoin and blockchain does. It removes friction from these interactions, and so it makes it possible to have interactions that might not have been possible previously. So the microtransactions talked about, but the idea of also doing, you know, crowdfunding and other use cases that, you know, blockchains have now enabled, starting with Bitcoin. I think removing that friction is what's going to create some really interesting business models in the future, and just give people freedom they didn't have prior.
Before we end, I just want to say that every time I say something that I'm like, it's like, and you're like, yes, that gives me so much validation. Like, and as a male, you know, we don't really get that much validation, so I'm enjoying this.
Sweet, yeah, same here.
You know, validation is key, people. That has nothing to do with this. So man, that's amazing. Anything else? Any final points?
I think that's it. I think just do your homework and watch for the next video.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. I'm Ryan.
I'm Michael.
And we'll see you next time.